Hello and welcome back to Imperfect Marketing. I'm your host, Kendra Corman, and today I am joined by Richard. He is a filmmaker, author, and master storyteller. He's honed his craft on hit TV shows, Grey's Anatomy, Chicago Med, This Is Us, my personal favorite, MacGyver, and 24. He's written award-winning books, taught story workshops to over 15,000 participants, and guest lectured at numerous universities, including Johns Hopkins, Columbia, and NYU. Pretty impressive resume. His passion for the creative process led him to develop programs that empower individuals to express themselves through AI-enhanced storytelling. And if you know anything about me, you know I love AI because it saves me. Actually, it used to save me 3 hours a week, and it's now up probably closer to about 30 hours a week. It's replaced a whole person, so it's pretty impressive. Anyway, his most recent book, ChatGPT Simplified, offers non-tech professionals a unique approach to unlocking the incredible potential of AI. Welcome, Richard. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Hello, Kendra. How are you?
I'm good. I'm good. So I love and know the importance of storytelling. And that's a big piece of what you do when it comes to AI. So, why don't you tell the audience how and why storytelling is so important?
Storytelling allows us to connect on an emotional level, on a practical level. And there's an interesting statistic. I normally don't dive into statistics, but this one is so incredible. 85% of all our daily communication is told through story or some sort of narrative structure. And when I first heard that, I went, no, it can't be. 85%? But then as I started sort of diving into a day and thinking about how I communicate to folks and how I get information from folks, it's right. It may be even higher. And that's the verbal storytelling that we banter back and forth. And so if we consider the mental sparring and storytelling that we're continuously telling ourselves, it probably goes up. It probably goes up to 98% of all of our communication during the day.
It is impressive, and I think people prefer to hear stories.
Oh,
They
absolutely.
they engage more with them.
Of course, of course. I mean, think about for as long as humans have been communicating, 10,000, 14,000 years. I mean, however long it's been, right? We've figured out ways of communicating, and they work best through story. I mean, our brains have become wired to communicate through story, but also to understand story. And I mean, there have been, I've read 300 different articles and reports and studies, master's theses and doctoral dissertations on the benefits of storytelling. And there are incredible studies that show that children who either hear stories or tell stories themselves learn how to read much more quickly because, and think about it, because of the context. If you're interacting with a child and they hear stories day in, day out, again, whether they're told, read, or shared, that child starts to understand the context without even knowing the terms protagonist, antagonist, call to action. They start to understand the concept and context of a story. And so when they read, they can fill in those blanks. In fact, I had a Spanish teacher in high school, and she would have all of us tell stories, and they're fairy tales. I told Jack and the Beanstalk, and one of my other classmates told Little Red Riding Hood, but we had to tell those stories in Spanish. Now, what happens is, as the audience, as the other students are hearing the story, they already know the story in English, and they start filling in the blanks, and all of a sudden you realize, wow, I know so many more vocabulary words than I thought I did because of the context of knowing the story already, but also knowing the story structure. So story is an incredible way to connect with folks, and on an emotional level, and as I said, a practical level. And so what I do is when I work with college groups, I work with students of all ages, and I say that because aren't we all students of life? I do consulting and I do workshops and seminars. And so when I go in, I work to help folks figure out how to tell stories in a way that is compelling and captivating. And then we take, and so we may be just telling a joke, or in a breakout session telling, making up a poem based on sense memory. And that enables us to hone our storytelling techniques so that we can then use those techniques when we're presenting to a group of folks, whether that group is a team of 5 people and we're working on a project together, or if we've got a speech or a talk that we're leading for 200 or 300 people in an auditorium or a banquet hall.
It's just storytelling is just so powerful. It's just so powerful. And in my email newsletters, I actually have been testing changing them and moving them over more to more storytelling,
Mm,
and the engagement is going up. I tested earlier this year, last year, I was testing GIFs. GIFs made a huge improvement
yeah.
in it, because it plays up on the story and it gets that greater engagement. And I think it truly adds more value to people because they can relate to it more, remember it more, and it just sticks with them.
Well, now, are you familiar, Kendra? Are you familiar with the term narrative transport?
I don't think I am.
Okay, all right. Here, let's dive in. So not to get too deep into the psychology or the science, but there's incredible brain science behind storytelling and why storytelling works. And one of the major concepts, it's called narrative transport. Now, think about when you're reading a book, or you're listening to a piece of music that you love, or you're watching a favorite movie or TV show. What happens? You get sucked in, right? You start paying attention to the characters, especially if you're familiar with it, or if it's just a well-told story. You get sucked in, and you're transported to the world, to the characters of that story. And all sorts of things in life can be going on. You've got a pizza in the oven, the dinger's going off, and it's burning. Someone's knocking at the door to deliver something, and all that just fades away. It just all disappears because you've been transported to another time, another place, another world where these characters exist. And that's the goal ultimately for any storyteller. It's to transport the audience to another time and place. And now stories can be told just simply for entertainment purposes. We've all sat down to watch some mindless TV or read a summer book, right, or a beach book. And so there are times when story, all it does is it just entertains. But story can also do way, way more than that. It can compel us to action. It can connect us with folks, can connect a storyteller to an audience. And so when we go in or we start thinking about telling a story to an audience, we want to figure out what the connection points are between us as the storyteller and an audience. And again, an audience can be just an audience of one. If we're out to lunch or we have a meeting about a project with just one person, we can use story in that sense. But we can also use story if we have a team, if we're dealing with clients, if we're dealing with a R&D department or a marketing department. Story is so much more than just getting the message out there, right? A lot of times when I go into an organization, we start talking about story and they say, oh yeah, we should really connect you with our marketing department. I said, no. Story is for everyone, because the more that we tell stories and the better that we tell stories between departments, between the actual business and its clients, the more we pass on information that can be utilized in really, really interesting ways. For instance, if you have a client and you have a salesperson go out in the field and they're working with the client and the client says, oh yeah, we love this product. And we actually, we figured out how to use the product in a way that, well, we're not sure if you guys even considered yet. Well, if that story gets back to the folks in R&D or the folks in marketing, all of a sudden you can expand the breadth of the product based on that story. So it's really important for folks to understand that even if they don't consider themselves storytellers or marketers, story can be used to really heighten the interaction between departments and between folks who are working on developing a product, project, or service.
So we're going to make the assumption that everybody understands storytelling is important. And I definitely agree with you 100%. So you are a big proponent of AI, which
Hmm.
so am I. I love it. I actually didn't realize I was using as much as I was using of AI because I didn't realize half the stuff I was using was AI.
That's right.
My favorite AI tool is ChatGPT by far. So tell me a little bit about how ChatGPT can be used to help people that might struggle with storytelling.
Well, let me use a little example from my own personal experience. So, I work with a career tech school, and they came to me and they said, "We love your approach to storytelling. We would love for you to create a storytelling for trainers course." And I said, "Okay, sounds great." And they said, because what happens is trainers sometimes they tell too many stories, and the stories, they sort of ramble on, and we get reports back that it's just the training session was just story. That was it. There wasn't much to it. Or conversely, on the opposite end of the spectrum, the trainer they don't tell any stories at all, so they're not utilizing story to as examples for the points that they're trying to make. And so we put together a course, and as I was reflecting on, okay, these folks are going to be coming up with stories to train trainers and to go out in the workplace, and I thought, well, these folks may be a little intimidated by coming up with stories just out of whole cloth. And so as I was using ChatGPT to help me figure out the best ways to organize this workshop and outline it, I thought, oh my gosh, what if I use ChatGPT and I make a small portion of this workshop about how to use ChatGPT to generate or help folks generate stories that can work within the workshops, the training sessions that they're doing. And so we within the workshop, we created a section that helps those folks learn how to use ChatGPT. And so ChatGPT is an amazing technology. It's an amazing tool. And I really view ChatGPT as a tool like a mathematician or an engineer might use a calculator. You can't expect an engineer to put a SpaceX rocket up into space with a pad of paper and a pen or a pencil. And the same thing in this world that we're living in now that moves at hyperspeed, we need help to create on a hyperspeed level. And so we can use ChatGPT to brainstorm, to outline, to help us figure out, type in, okay, I'm doing a training session on workplace safety. What are some stories? And again, humor is one of the best ways to use story. We could use some humorous stories to outline why workplace safety is fun, but also get people to retain that information and remember why they need to put workplace safety onto the factory floor. And so it's important to utilize stories, and ChatGPT can help us get those stories or unearth those stories and help us, sort of maximize the effect of those stories. So it's a really interesting way. ChatGPT is really an amazing brainstorm tool. That's really the best and number one use that I find for ChatGPT is as a brainstorm tool.
Oh, I love using it to brainstorm. I do that all of the time. Whenever I'm looking for new podcast ideas and
Oh
things like
yeah,
that, I use it all of the time. But yes, it really helps people so they don't have to start with a blank page. I
right.
think that's really important. But I also think another piece that's really important that you covered is that you are important when it comes to ChatGPT. It's not about having it do all of the work for you.
Cool.
It's about leveraging it as a tool, like a calculator, right? So it
Yeah.
is a tool. It is not the end all be all, does it all thing. You still have to create a difference by adding in your thoughts and your experience and expertise.
Well, you bring up a great point, Kendra. And the fact is, a lot of people think that ChatGPT or AI in general is going to reduce us to little robots. It's gonna reduce all our communications just to mush. And you think about the mom and pop burger stands in the 30s, 40s, 50s that then the landscape transformed to McDonald's and Burger King, Wendy's and Jack in the Box, whatever. And it all of a sudden became all the burgers taste the same, right? Well, if you create a prompt and you say, okay, Richard, I use this prompt to create to create content, to create a blog post. Here, you can use it. If I take that same prompt and I create a blog post, I may be writing about a different subject, but our blog posts are going to sound somewhat similar because I use the same prompt. Now, if I take that prompt and I infuse it with my personality, with my own idiosyncrasies and quirks and everything, I say, okay, I want it to have a certain energy. I want it to have a sense of humor here, and I want to infuse what I'm writing with some pop culture references to keep folks interested. Well, all of a sudden, I've transformed that prompt into something that really says Richard Rosser. And it ceases to be the Kendra prompt and becomes the Richard prompt. And if I pass it on to someone else, and if they need to change it, they need to update it, they need to tweak it. So really, ChatGPT is a tool that can help us all amplify our creativity. It can help us really heighten our originality, our individualism, and not just ours, but for whatever product or service or project we're working on at that time. And so that's something to remember, is that we as human beings are the critical thinkers. ChatGPT, it's really put together as it's going to figure out what word should come after the previous word. And that's what it does on a mathematical basis. It's a probability machine. But it can't think about what's good and what's bad. It can't ultimately decide what works for our clients or doesn't. We are the folks who ultimately decide that based on our ability to think critically. Now, of course, as ChatGPT and all these various technologies, as they get more complex and they can really tailor information. I mean, you can say to ChatGPT, hey, write a passage and now write it as Shakespeare and write it as J.K. Rowling. And so it can give the flavor and feel of writing to the context of a specific author, or you can give it information and say, hey, duplicate this approach in terms of your writing style. And you can give it an example of your own personal writing style. But ultimately, Kendra, you are the arbiter of taste, the good, the bad, the ugly, when it comes to ChatGPT.
So one tip for everybody, ChatGPT thinks that punctuation goes outside of the quotation marks. It was learned on the internet. And I will tell you right now, that is the single most frustrating thing that I do, is put the punctuation back inside the quotation marks, because that is not correct. Okay.
That's right.
So just because, again, it learned on tons of data, some of that data was wrong. Just because it's on the internet does not make it true. So again, you have to review everything. I teach part-time. I'm adjunct faculty at a local university here in Michigan. And one of the things is that I have encouraged my students this semester to embrace AI.
Fantastic.
I want them using it for everything. Now, if it has one false source, they get a 0 on that assignment. So I want to make sure, and every assignment has to have a source. That's one of my requirements. That way I'm making sure that they're at least, looking at stuff and working with it. But it's extremely important to them to be able to stay relevant as we go into working through communications. I mean, I make ChatGPT, I think, reword things more often for me than almost anything else it does. I'm like, here, write this nicer.
Right. Right.
I'm sometimes a little too direct for people.
Well, it's interesting because people don't realize, you mentioned it before, that you're using AI and you didn't even realize it. Grammarly is AI.
I live in Grammarly. I love it.
Exactly. And as Grammarly has gone from just being okay, check the commas and the periods and the quotation marks to, hey, here's an alternate way to rephrase that. It's all AI. And there's so many instances of ways that we use AI in our lives that we don't even realize, but that we've been using for years, in fact, decades in some cases. But again, it's important. I love how you're teaching students to use AI, but not just rely upon it. I mean, there's the most recent story about the attorney who went into court and he was arguing his case, and he brought up two or three or four cases as examples of case study, and the judge says, uh, this, I've never heard of any of these cases. These don't quite sound right. And they dove into the internet, and actually looked the cases up, and lo and behold, they didn't exist.
Hmm.
ChatGPT had made up these cases, and very often, Kendra, or every time I want to use a source, or I say, give me a case study based on a real life situation. ChatGPT will spit something out, and very often I go back in and I say, okay, is this a real case study? And it'll say, oh, it's so funny. It says, oh, I'm sorry, I didn't realize you wanted a real case study. And I say, well, that's what I put. You can get an argument. That's what I put in the beginning. My beginning prompt was, I want a real case study. And it says, oh, I didn't realize you wanted a real case study. That's an amalgam that I created from existing information that I have in my brain. And so we all need to be really careful about how we utilize the technology and how we depend on it and rely on it. And again, if you're in a life or death situation, you certainly want to make sure that you're getting the correct information. But even if you're turning in a paper in Kendra's class, you want to make sure that you've got a real bona fide resource, because otherwise you're getting a zero.
Yep. Well, I mean, it's simple to check,
Yes, it is.
but you
Very.
have to check. And that's the motivation is I want them to know that they have to check and make sure that they're checking.
That's right.
So let's talk about, I mean, part of the reason I'm including to my students, and I'm including it in all of my online courses and my coaching, and I'm doing a ton of presentations on leveraging AI for marketing and communications. I'm still hearing from people that they're scared of AI, or they're intimidated by AI, or, they're worried that this is becoming the Terminator,
Mhm.
and machines are overtaking the world. But they need this to stay relevant. What are your thoughts on how people can stay relevant when they're all scared that AI is going to take their jobs or take over their lives in the world?
Well, let's go back in the past. Let's go back to the mid 1400s, right? And think about an invention that came around called the printing press. Well, at that point in time, everything was really, stories were told through the oral tradition. And if you think about it, you had bards and minstrels and court jesters and all these folks, telling stories, singing stories, performing stories. And this thing came out called the book. And they all freaked out. And they said, oh my gosh, no one's going to want to hear stories anymore or go to performances. They're just going to sit home and read this book. Well, what happened? I mean, think about the 600 some odd years between then and now. Think how many performers there are out there and many ways that we get information. We have comedians, and we have performance artists, and we have actors, we have podcasts. I mean, who would have thought podcasts would become so popular given the fact that we are such a visually oriented society? But
Hmm.
podcasts, it blows me away how many podcasts I listen to, how many podcast friends listen to. And so with this new technology of AI in general, and ChatGPT in specific, or Bard, Bing, all the various possibilities for a chat based, text based GPT or AI, comes the opportunity for possibilities. And one of the coolest things about ChatGPT is it's its own instruction manual. Now, Kendra, you may sit there and go, its own instruction manual. What the heck is he talking about? Well, think about if you buy a microwave, right? You get a paper instruction manual, or you can go online and get the instruction manual on your phone or tablet or whatever. And if you have a problem, you can troubleshoot. And so you can go and figure out what's going on. And it can help you move past the challenge. Now, with ChatGPT, when you have an issue or a challenge or a problem or a question, it's as simple as just typing in a prompt. Hey, I don't understand this. How can I make this better? How can I do better? What can I use ChatGPT for that I'm not currently using it for? I mean, you can ask it its own question, and it will respond as its own instruction manual. So my advice to folks is try to do what you can to embrace this technology. As much as we don't want to hear it, AI and ChatGPT are here to stay. And yes, it's ChatGPT is going to replace certain jobs, or it's going to streamline the workflow for certain jobs. But it's also going to open up opportunities for jobs. I mean, think of computers and the internet and jobs that exist now that didn't exist 10 or 20 or 30 years ago. And so with new technology comes incredible possibilities, but also comes the possibility of jobs going to the wayside. But if folks embrace the technology and learn what they can about it and try to get past the tech aspect of it, and that's I wrote this book, ChatGPT Simplified, and it's written through the eyes of a storyteller. I wrote it for folks who are not technically minded. Now, I'm not a programmer. I'm not a coder. In the film and TV business, I've dealt with a lot of technical things, cameras and special effects and all that kind of stuff. So I'm a fairly technically minded person, but I'm not an in the weeds coder or programmer type person. And so what I did was I wrote this book for folks. It's really entertaining. As I said before, I infused it with a lot of humor. I put in a lot of pop culture references because I wanted to create something that was fun and entertaining, a really fun, quick read, the layers on the possibilities of creativity and how we can use this technology in really, really creative ways, not just brainstorming, outlining, organizing, content creation, all of the things that we've been talking about during this call. And so it's important for folks to sort of push down their anxiety and dive in a little bit and explore. It's like anything. The more you work with it, the better you're going to get. And the more you explore with it, the better your prompts are going to be, the better responses you're going to get from this technology.
Yeah. No, I agree 100%. So I think, two of our big takeaways from today is definitely storytelling is extremely important in all communications because
Yeah,
that is how we naturally learn and remember, and it will make you more memorable. It'll also differentiate you in a world where people are leveraging AI because creating content has never been easier,
right.
which shockingly enough makes it so much easier to differentiate yourself because so many people aren't taking that extra step to differentiate themselves. And storytelling is a great way to do that. Thank you so much, Richard, for joining me today and all of the information you shared. We could go on and on and on. I'm looking at the recording time and I'm like, oh no. I'm like, we could just keep going. And I would love to keep going, but I do want to be respectful of our listeners' time and I do appreciate everybody tuning in. Before I let you go, I do have a question that I ask all of my guests, and that is, this show is called Imperfect Marketing, because as we all know, marketing is anything but a perfect science. So what has been your biggest marketing lesson learned?
I think it's to experiment and revise and keep moving forward because, like you said, imperfect marketing, imperfect world, imperfect prompt. And it's the same thing. Marketing and life are an iterative process. We hit something and we come up against a wall or a curb, and we need to turn and pivot and keep moving. So I think, and that's one of the things that this technology can help us do. It can help us think outside the box in ways that we weren't able to before when we're just by ourselves in our little rooms, or with colleagues or friends. This technology gives us the ability to really think outside the box in unique and really big ways. And so embrace this new technology, use it, experiment with it, explore with it, and remember how important and compelling a story can be as you go out and move through the world in the next couple of days.
Thank you so much. Again, I really do appreciate your time and taking time out of your busy schedule to join me on today's episode. We'll have a link to his website, on Richard's website, where it's aiexplained.ai. That'll be in the show notes. But if you want to connect with him, learn more about him, buy his book, all of that information will be in the show notes for you. So be sure to check it out. Thank you again so much for tuning in to another episode of Imperfect Marketing. If you learned something, it would really help me out if you would go ahead and rate and subscribe wherever you're listening or watching. Thanks, and have a great rest of your day.